Hello, everybody. It is Thursday, November 24th, 2011, Thanksgiving Day. For us here in the United States, everybody else, this is kind of an American tradition. We are supposed to take the day and gorge ourselves on turkey and other food and be thankful for our blessings, and I certainly am. As you can hear, I've still got my bad sinus, and it's it's wearing me out, folks, but I want to thank everybody since it is Thanksgiving. That's what I'm primarily here to do, is to thank everybody about the prayers and emails I've been getting for getting over this really horrible sinus. 4 weeks of basically a nonstop sinus headache and taking medicine and trying to work, and I'm worn out. But my second thank you to all of those who have responded with donations and with new memberships. I really do want to thank those of you who've been trying to help promote the site and the members on the site, because eventually, like I've said so many times, when I get this site up and going on its own, I'll take that donate button down. I do want to try and give people something of value for their contributions, and I do really appreciate it. I am still working on a sequel or two to Babylon's Banksters. I'm working on one ebook with co-author Scott DeHart, and I'm working on a second ebook on my own, plus website white papers, which I'm hoping I'll get done before the turn of the year, and some more videos that Daniel and I have planned, video interviews and so on, in the members area. Anyway, that is the news. And I had an interesting question that Georgianne Hughes emailed me from a listener to her show, and I thought I'd address that here. Email says, the next time you and Joseph do one of your shows, I wanted to know if you can ask him to address something. I came across the website of a theoretical physicist named Arkadiusz Jacek. He examines the mathematics of Tom Bearden, who I have referred to numerous times and who Richard Hoagland seems to base his assumptions on for hyperdimensional physics. This professor concludes that Bearden and his colleagues have made fundamental errors in their mathematics and that it makes no sense at all. So can you explain or give a layman's explanation and talk about what is going on? All right, I can do that. First, it is not true that Richard Hoagland bases his assumptions of hyperdimensional physics on Tom Bearden or Tom Bearden alone. In fact, the one interview where Mr. Hoagland went into some depth about his thinking in terms of hyperdimensional physics was an interview that he gave at the United Nations back in the 1990s. And he references there a book by the British Canadian mathematician by the name of H.S.M. Coxeter. That's spelled Coxeter. And that particular book, I have a copy of it over on my shelf. That particular book is called Regular Polytopes. Now, this book is not a book of physics per se. It's rather a book of how geometricians deal with objects in more than 3 spatial dimensions. It's a book that teaches the basic techniques and assumptions behind that kind of higher dimensional mathematics. So that's primarily the source that at least I'm aware, that Mr. Hoagland has used in his lectures. I've used it in Grid of the Gods. Now, the second thing we need to know is that when we're talking about hyperdimensional physics, what we're really talking about is physics theories that attempt to deal with the unification of the 4 physical forces, and those are gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear forces, all right? Back in the 1920s and 1930s, there were a number of papers that physicists published that attempted to deal with the unification of gravity and electromagnetism, leaving out the other 2 forces of quantum mechanics. And they did so in mathematical geometrized theories. In other words, they were following the lead of Albert Einstein, who in his relativity papers is describing physical forces in terms of geometries or geometrical effects on space-time. And mathematicians and physicists discovered that they could come up with theories of unifying the geometries of electromagnetism and gravity in higher dimensional mathematical systems, such as Coxeter uses or employs in his regular polytopes. And these systems were developed in the 19th century by a German mathematician by the name of Riemann. They were further kind of adapted and played with by an Italian mathematician by the name of Ricci, who came up with one of the versions of the torsion tensor, by the French mathematician Poincaré, and so on and so forth. So in other words, what we're really talking about with hyperdimensional physics are various mathematical techniques that have been applied to physics to explain how the forces can be unified in one consistent set of equations. Now, along comes Tom Bearden. And Tom Bearden, of course, has written a number of books over several years, and in fact many papers, that explains or explores what he has consistently been calling scalar physics. And in fact, it's really Bearden who is responsible for the promotion of this idea. All right. Bearden is a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. He's also a member of Mensa, if I'm not mistaken. And he does rely a bit on mathematics in his book. But I should point out that very early on in his relationship with theoretical physicists such as Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher and so on and so forth, that she herself pointed out some errors in Bearden's formulation of the equations. If I remember correctly, she pointed out that there were inconsistencies in some of his Fourier analysis, which is a very technical mathematical technique. But by and large, what she is also saying, or also said at the time, and I don't know if she's changed her views or not, she also said at the time that conceptually Bearden is making sense. And this is an important point, folks, to understand. Theoretical physics is a blend of very abstract conceptualization with applied mathematics. So in other words, in my opinion, having read a little bit in this area and being a rank amateur, I want to stress this. In my opinion, it's possible to have the right basic concept with the wrong mathematics. This goes on quite a bit in at least what I've seen in the development of theoretical physics. Bearden relies for his thinking or conceptualization on two papers that were in fact published in Mathematische Annalen in Germany prior to the First World War around 1903. And one paper is a paper that's very, very important. I reference this in, I think, Secrets of the Unified Field, SS, Brotherhood of the Bell, and so on and so forth. And this is a paper by E.T. Whittaker, the British theoretical physicist. And the paper is called On the Partial Differential Equations of Mathematical Physics. This paper is a highly mathematical paper, but if you read it, you also need to read just simply for the concepts that he's really talking about. And what it comes down to is that in Bearden's thinking, as he's developed it from Whittaker, there is a stress vector that appears in mathematical physics. And in certain mathematical techniques, that stress vector, because it's not a translation vector, in other words, it does not move things from point A to point B, which is what we normally understand and have modeled as the physical forces. In Bearden's understanding, there is a stress vector that sums to zero, and therefore mathematically, physicists, because it sums to zero, physicists toss it out without realizing that you can have several vectors summing to zero at a particular place, and that means that at that point there is a lot of energy locked up inside the system, even though it doesn't appear to be anything on the outside. And that's basically Bearden's essential conceptualization. Now, the reason I think that's very important is that mathematically This was more or less what James Clerk Maxwell originally had modeled in his equations of electromagnetism. And I think to a certain extent, this idea of an infolded or an implicate order is exactly the same thing that we find later on, much later on than Whittaker in the physicist David Bohm. So in other words, you have to be very careful, people. Someone like Bearden can be wrong, and he has been wrong with some of his mathematics. But the conceptualization is not always necessarily to be tossed out along with the mathematics. This is the big problem with theoretical physics. You're literally engineering equations to the theory. And that is very, very difficult, as any physicist knows. Anyway, I hope that's a clarification. I want again to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving and be with your families. They're the most important thing. And cherish your loved ones, because having lost someone dear to me in the last couple of years, holidays are a particularly hard time. So cherish your loved ones. Spend time with them, folks. Bye bye. God bless, and I'll see you on the flip side.